All right, so welcome everyone. It's really nice being here, having you here. I thought we would talk about something that I hear often. People complain about not being able to meditate because it's so hard to sit still, and that can apply to either physically sitting still or just quieting the mind. And so I have found a few techniques that I would like to share with you so that you can try them out and see if it helps you in your meditation. Now, one of the things that I received in my training a long time ago in the Holy Order of Man's was a relaxation exercise. And what we found is that when you relax physically, that your mind naturally comes to a halt. Your thinking comes to a halt. And at first it may speed up, you may become aware of just the mental chatter, which is really annoying. It so gets in the way of doing any kind of meditation. And if it goes on too long, you start to feel like meditation is worthless because all you did was sit there and listen to your mind. So it's really, there's a whole world that opens up if you can control your thinking. And so there are a few ways to do it. I don't know if you've ever done a relaxation exercise, but the simplest one is simply by starting with your extremities, like your toes and your hands, and tensing the muscles in them for a couple of seconds and then relaxing. And then slowly moving toward the center of your body, like with your calves, your forearms, your thighs, your upper arms. You do those separately because it's easier to do them separately. And by the time you get to the top of your head, then your body is pretty relaxed. And I'll share with you a really interesting experience that I had one time. I was going to this class by Lilias Folan. She was a yoga teacher that was on TV. And she came to town, and I went to one of her seminars. And at the end, after we had been doing yoga poses for an hour or so, she had us do the prone posture. We're just totally relaxed. And after moving the body and really getting stretched and feeling very relaxed, I started to go into that deep relaxation, and my mind was quiet, but all of a sudden I could hear everybody else thinking. It was the weirdest sensation. It was like everyone in the room was chattering away just out loud. And what I was experiencing was like, if not the conscious thinking, it was like right behind that in everybody. And the room was just filled with not the physical room, but my perception just above the physical level. There was all of this noise going on. And so what that showed me was that as I got relaxed, and I started picking up other people's thoughts. So that can happen. Things can happen when you master this relaxation. And so normally when you're trying to meditate, you're in a room by yourself. And so when you go into that relaxation, you're going to start to pick up deeper layers of your own thinking, right? I'm sure you've experienced this, how there's the conscious mind, then there's right below the threshold of consciousness, there's a lot of observing going on. Your mind is being aware and running through lists and picking up sensations, feelings, and all of that's being processed. And as you drop into that layer, it can be quite noisy. But as you continue to relax, you drop even below that, which is like the sub of the subconscious mind. There's like the subconscious mind is like a basement, and then you go down into that basement and you discover, whoa, there's another basement below this one. So you go down into it. You see, you ever have that dream? This is a classic Jungian dream where you discover that there's a basement below the basement. You're in your dream, you go into the basement, and then there's another level. Anybody, or is it just me? Am I crazy? Is Jung crazy? Well, now that I've told you about it, if you haven't experienced, maybe you will.
It actually reminded me of a dream there. Like when I was much like a child, I would say.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Terrible. It was more of a
Tell
nightmare. Go on.
Oh, I know it's a little freaky. But that's the nature of the mind. And those are the places that will start to open up in our meditation if we can quiet our thinking. You see, and this is one of the ways to do that, which is to practice relaxing the body. And then as the more relaxed you get, the quieter your mind gets. And the quieter your conscious mind gets, the quieter your thinking gets, then the more you become aware of other areas of your mind within, the inner space in which you live and operate. So practice that, practice the relaxation, practice relaxing before going into meditation. So there's another little technique, and this takes a little bit of ability to concentrate and a little bit of ability to visualize. So what I have found is that it's not enough to focus on an idea or even an object. It really helps to pick something alive, something that has a living presence to it. And the thing that I find most useful is a candle. And we don't normally think of candles as being alive, but they're active. There's a process going on, the process of combustion. And if you're in a room where there's no air disturbance, the candle flame becomes very still and very tall and very heated. It has a real presence to it. It's emitting light in omnidirectionally. The light is going out in a globular shape. So it has presence to it. So whenever we focus on something that has a living presence, that immediately quiets our thinking, because we get out of that reflexive kind of thinking to paying attention to something that's moving. You see, something that has movement and action and aliveness to it. And that's like watching your cat, right? If your cat's doing something and you focus in on it, even if it's just for a few seconds, your mind stops thinking and you're observing. So it's in the act of observation that your thinking quiets. It becomes quiet. Let's do this now. Let's just kind of sit comfortably and close your eyes. And now visualize a candle flame. There's nothing in the background. It's like a dark background, but it's as though you're sitting in a darkened room with one candle sitting on the table in front of you. Just look at the flame. Notice how the flame tapers towards the top. And you can feel, you can't see it really, but you can feel the way the air around the candle, as it gets heated, it shoots straight up. It goes right up the flame, which is what makes the flame develop a point to it, because there's a convection current of air. As the air heats, it goes straight up. So it's doing something. It's not just a static object. This is a real, living, alive, active thing. And you can even, in your mind's eye, put your hand over the flame, up 6-8 inches, something like that, and you can feel that column of heat. So there's a real action taking place. And if it helps with your imagination, you can sense that the candle flame is aware of you. That definitely will stop your thinking. Let's just sit with that for a few more seconds. Okay. All right, let's come out of that, come back into your body. I know that sounds weird, come back into your body as though you're just had an out-of-body experience, but in a way you did, because you were focused on an inner reality, and for just a little bit, you lose consciousness of your surroundings. So you can also do this with your surroundings, like the room you're in, as though the room has a presence to it. And it really does, because everything in the room is imbued with your vibration and your presence. And, many people have been in that room, and you can, again, with your imagination, feel that presence. Every object has like a presence to it. And as you put your attention on those objects in that way, that too will quiet your mind. It can happen, in very simple ways. You're driving in your car and you take a second and you look up at your rearview mirror, because you're looking to observe something. Your thoughts stop. If you've ever been in a situation where there was a sudden, unexpected, loud noise, like a car backfiring or an explosion of some kind, you and everybody else immediately stops thinking and starts looking around saying, what was that? Anything that comes as a surprise, the mind shuts down its thinking, and it goes into awareness, wide awake. Everything in your brain starts to attend to the break in the baseline. In baseline means normal. Something out of the ordinary happens and thinking shuts down instantly. So if you're having trouble meditating because of a noisy mind, reverse engineer that. Recreate that same feeling. Like in your imagination, you can imagine that there was all of a sudden a loud noise outside the house, and you force your mind into that same mode. Like, what was that? You could do it by casting, the way we look off into the distance for something, if we're outside, we look, even that will quiet your mind if you're looking for something specific. You can do that with your hearing too. You can cast your hearing. So like if you're in the house, you can pretend that you can hear what's going on, no matter how quiet, even if it's like an ant crawling over a leaf on a tree. You pretend that you can hear that and you listen for it. That throws the mind into that listening mode. Thinking stops. So for like with meditation, you can cast your hearing within yourself, as though, because we're not aware of what's behind us, right? We have this forward orientation because of our eyes and because we're always moving towards something. We're always doing something and moving towards it. But if we become aware of the space behind us, that's kind of like a dead zone. That's a quiet area, and there's no visuals back there. But if we don't do this by looking back there, because when you look, if you look internally, all you're doing is you're turning around and putting what's in back of you in front of you. So that doesn't work. It doesn't have the same effect on the brain. But if you cast your hearing back there, that's a whole different thing. You see, that has nothing to do with your visual cortex. So let's try that. Let's try that now. Just close your eyes and listen, even for an imaginary sound behind you. It's a little hard to do because we're not used to doing that. But you can see how that quiets your thinking. That will take you into a deeper layer of your mind. And as you practice these kinds of techniques, then you not only go into that deeper layer of the mind, you go into areas that are deeper still. And a real well-practiced meditator, there's no end to that. It just goes in and in and in. If you're not going far in distance, you're going far in detail. You're going far in terms of subtlety. So it doesn't always match the concept of going far. It's more like paying closer and closer attention. So these are just a couple of techniques you can use in your meditation. And you'll find that it will take you into areas that are like a big wow, right? It's a level of intensity and presence that you're not normally used to because we're always so caught up in what we're doing out here in the world. Meditation, the word means moving toward the center. That's what meditation means. And moving towards the center of what? Center of you. And that means moving away from the objects of sense. You're moving away from your senses into your internal awareness. And the internal part is the internality of your mind, of your consciousness. You're moving your consciousness backwards into those spaces that you never think of, right? They're not even a concern usually. So if you're having trouble meditating, this is what you do. This is how you train your mind to do what you want it to do. Because if you don't, then the mind, it's not you. The mind is not you. The mind is just a bunch of stuff, a bunch of mental activity, a bunch of chatter. And even when you have a disciplined mind and you can keep it on one subject and actively think about something, it's still not too clear if that's what you're doing or if you're simply accessing a field that's already there. These days, this is really interesting. These days, we call the mind a large language model. So almost identical to ChatGPT or any of the other large language model AIs. The mind predicts. We have a predictive function of the mind. So when I'm speaking now, the mind is working to form sentences, paragraphs, streams of thought, sequences of thought that it predicts. It predicts what are the best words to fulfill the purpose of conveying a concept, conveying an idea. So we're working with, it's almost like a mechanism, but it's not a mechanism like a machine in the sense that, machines are things in the world that do the same thing over and over. Or we even if we give it something different to do, it does that over and over until we change it. So the mind is like a machine, and we are the ones operating the machine. You see, that's what's back in there. When we quiet the thinking, the more we quiet our thoughts, the more we become aware of us, of who we are. And we're not a thinker. We don't think. We use the process of thought. We use a mechanism that is already in place all around us. And it's also in place by virtue of the fact that we are human beings with a brain, which is where the processing goes on. So we are like the driver in a car that has instrumentation all around us, and we're pushing the buttons and turning the wheels and doing all of the things necessary to get much of what is available to us to come into play. So I don't know if this is too abstract, but it really, it's so much like driving an automobile or flying an airplane in that we're at the controls, but it's doing the work. Our minds work the same way. We're at the controls, but it's doing the work. Now, the problem is with most of us, most of the time, is we're not at the controls. The machine has taken over and is just going through its habitual activities, you see, and that's not a good thing. So, I mean, it's not a good thing if you want to be awake, if you want to be spiritually awake. So what we're doing is we are becoming more and more aware of ourselves by and through meditation, because as we meditate and we quiet our minds, quiet the thinking, then we go in and we discover, oh, I'm the one who's watching. I'm the one who's observing all of this. And I can put things into motion in this mechanism, you see. And as I do, if I can maintain that vantage point, that perspective, then I can become very aware of what's playing out. You see, that I can become very aware of what the cause and effect relationships are in my life. You see? So let me open it up for feedback now. How is this striking you? What do you see? How was that experience for you?
You got me really curious, that's for sure.
What did you experience, Jesse? Did anything come up for you in all of that?
Yeah, well, when you mentioned the directing the hearing inward, just like made so much sense. So I'm kind of looking forward to doing that at some
Oh,
point.
good. Who else?
So I had a question.
Yes.
First of all, it's just so exciting to hear you talk about all of these things. So thank you for sharing. I'm loving all the information that you are blessing us with. I guess my question is about the flame meditation. I've done that before in the past, and I've always been, I guess, as I've done it and I've experienced it, experience reactions in my body and specifically, in my eyeballs. And as a young child, I was told, well, don't ever stare at any flames or anything for too long. It'll burn your eye sockets out. So I know that me stopping the meditation, even though I was receiving some really insightful stuff, was, coming from a place of childhood trauma and fear. But I guess the question I have is, when you're doing a candle meditation, is that something that you need to be mindful of, is how long you do it for, the kinds of reactions that you experience in your body? Should I be experiencing that kind of stuff within the center of my eyeballs and the back, toward my third eye? Is that, guess I'm kind of just looking for some insight here.
Yes, of course. But I'm glad you bring that up because we want to be able to distinguish the act of looking from the act of seeing. Now, we see with our eyes. The eyes are like receivers. The light comes in and impacts the back of the eyeball, and that's translated into signals that go into the brain, all of that. But the act of looking, you see, is different. The act of looking is larger than seeing because there's intention involved. So by doing this internally with our imagination, we're turning down the dials on the seeing aspect, just being receptive to visual impressions. We turn that down and we turn up the intention of looking. You see? So I don't know if that helps, but that's something you might, contemplate, and because it's a big difference. So seeing is passive, looking is active. And when we turn that active intention within ourselves, it's like our eyes get really large because we're looking with so much more of us than we are. It's almost like, the doing the listening or the hearing part of the exercise. It's almost like there's more to the act of looking than just the seeing. Because there is that intention. It's like we move into that inner space, and that motion is a larger dimension to the act of seeing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Sure. You can listen for things that are literally impossible to hear, like an ant walking across a leaf on the tree outside in your front yard. There's no way you can hear that, but you can, right? Because in reality, there's no distance between you and that ant, and there's no scale in which your ears are very limited in what they can hear, but the auditory centers in your brain have a much wider range. But because they're so tethered to the ear, we filter out almost all of what we are actually hearing. So by doing it with our imagination, we're shutting down the physical apparatus, and we're going into the actual act of hearing, which transcends our body. Because like the mind, the mind is not encapsulated in the skull. The mind is an ever-present, ubiquitous, universal reality. We just use it, and this body is set up so that it can use it. We're more like an antenna. The brain is more like an antenna than a propagation thing. So hearing is the same way. It's like you can, one thing you can contemplate is like everything is seen, everything is heard, everything is known. Everything. It's all around us at all times. But what the brain does, is it acts like a reducing valve. It's a filter. And if we didn't have that filter, we would be immediately into a psychedelic experience, in an intense psychedelic experience where all those filters are opened, you see. So that's the primary function of the brain, is to reduce the noise. So what we're doing in meditation is we're not only reducing the filter action of the brain, but we're redirecting the direction of the antenna, you might say. We're taking it away from the world and we're turning it within, which effectively the word within and the word behind are kind of synonymous, especially on the inner level. So we're taking the antenna and we're turning it around and pointing it within. So we're listening for sounds that are coming up from those unknown parts of the mind. We're looking for things that we're not looking even, we're receiving impressions on a much broader spectrum than just visual input. We're picking up everything. We're picking up ideas. We're picking up presence. That's probably the biggest thing we're looking for, is presence. What is present in there? And what we find, the more we do it, is that we become aware of a presence, and in religious terms, we give that presence an identity. We can say, well, that's God, right? We're looking for the presence of God. But what we discover the more we do that is that it's really us. It's really our presence. And that part of us that we become aware of, the presence, our own presence, if we want to know God, if we want to come in contact with the actual presence of God, then we have to do it from in there. We have to do it from presence, our presence to presence, presence to presence. You see, we can't do it with the mind. We can't think up a relationship with God or an experience of God. This has to shut down. This has to be quiet. And the more quiet it is, then the more awake we become to that presence which is deep within us. And when we realize that, hey, that presence that we're sensing in there is really us. It's like we're, that car I was using as an example before, the metaphor, it's like we're riding in our own car, but we're in the back seat. And the person that we see in the mirror, he or she is in the front seat driving, but we are in the back seat observing all of that. But because that person in the front seat thinks it's the whole show, the person in the back seat just kind of disappears. There's like a curtain, or like in a limousine, they draw the curtain. So you're back there behind the curtain. So the practice of meditation draws the curtain, and we slowly move farther and farther back into ourselves, and we discover, oh, this is where I am. You see? And then the mind becomes, the thinking, chattering part of the mind becomes more of an externality and something we can observe. And whenever we can observe something, that gives us more control over it. And then we find that, oh, wow, what that person just said to me, that's created this little tornado in my mind. But if you think you're your mind, then you are in the tornado. You're caught in the swirl. You're in the uptake. But if you have mastered this kind of internal awareness, then you can observe your mind in the swirl, but you're not caught in the updraft. You see? It's like you can observe yourself, even if on the outside you're literally freaking out, or you're in an argument or something like that. You become more and more aware of the real you inside, watching you do that, watching you go through it. And so what that does in the long term is that it lowers your anxiety, for one thing. You're no longer thinking that you are that swirl, that you are all that chaos. You begin more and more to realize that this external part of your life is just simply that. It's just the external part of your life, but you're always the observer. So you're in there observing, and that observer self is extremely wise in that it is still, it is quiet, so it has access to more information. You see, and then you begin to see, if you can observe yourself that way, then you can start to observe other people that way, and you can actually see behind their front, right? You can see behind their persona, and you can actually start to become aware of the God within them. And the more you can become aware of that, especially from the position of the God within you, then you can really then deal with that person God to God. Namaste. The God in me recognizes the God in you. I see you. All this stuff that's going on, that you think you're doing, I'm seeing through that. And I'm dealing with you on that basis, not with all the stuff, not with all the drama. So practicing meditation and practicing control over your own thinking gives you an amazing level of agency in the world. It broadens your choices. It gives you more power to be yourself and to be present with other people. Because when you speak from there, what's the other person is hearing is from that inner place within them. And so they become, as you speak to them, they're becoming more aware of their own inner being. You see, like we're doing now. See, we're focusing in on it. And as we do, we become more aware of it. And usually, you know, when people talk about this, they talk about it in terms of feelings. You know, are you aware of your feelings? It's like when somebody says something, is it all in your head? Or are you just reacting from idea, belief, ideology, all of that? Or are you really aware of how the other person is making you feel? And can you be with that more than with the ideas and the, you know, the dialogue? And people who can do that, you know, they're just naturally more present in any situation because they're just simply aware of the feeling atmosphere, right? They're not only aware of how they're feeling, but they're aware of how the other person is feeling. So it just makes them more real and more present to life. Well, this is kind of like that, but it's even deeper. Because from the vantage point of the observer self within you, and I'm just using that term because it's familiar, from the vantage point of the observer self, it's very quiet, it's very aware, it's in complete observation mode. It's watching everything and it's weighing everything. You see? And that way, a person who has mastered that, say if they're a martial artist, they know their opponent, they know when their opponent's going to move before they do. You see, it increases your awareness. If you're driving and you're in that state, you know if somebody's coming up from behind you or if there's going to be a problem a block down the road. This is called intuition. This is in synchronicity, you know, because the more you're in that, you're operating from that vantage point, then everything starts to work together and fold in together. And you become aware of the linkage of all things, how it's all one. You know, that's another kind of idiom, you know, it's all one. Well, it really is all one. But the brain filters that out and makes us focus on the particular and what's immediately relevant, you see. But relevance is often determined by what we believe and what we identify with. If we don't identify with something, then nothing about that is relevant to us. But the more we can withdraw from those parameters, then we begin to sense the relevance of all things, how everything is relevant. And it takes a lot of practice, right? I mean, when you open up your filters to that degree, then it's like being in another world, and you have to learn how to function in that world. So we approach this in steps, you know, in stages. We work with it, and as we grow, as our consciousness expands, then we learn how to deal with this broader reality. It's consciousness expansion. Okay. Who else would like to share?
What you're talking about being, you know, Jesus would say things like, I and the Father are one. And so people said, oh, he's God. But he also said, you and the Father can be one too, you know. And yeah, he's God, but you know, he's much more highly evolved than we are. But I think people really misunderstood a lot of what he said. The one lady that was talking, where she says she meditates and focuses on a sound, I have a constant ringing in my ears. I'm not always conscious of it, but it's not annoying to me. You know, it's actually very pleasant, and it helps me when I want to go into a meditative state, just to hear that and focus on that. And I remember one time I was at this Buddhist monastery, and I asked the Buddhist priest to teach my stepchildren how to meditate. And he said, when you go into that quiet place and a thought comes, just don't hang on to it. Let it float away like a fish going by or something. But but yeah, I've been, meditating for 50 years, I guess. And it seems like you don't always have to close your eyes and all that. You kind of get into a meditative state and when you're with your eyes open, going about your daily activities. Yeah.
Yes,
You
yes,
find
that's
that
so true. Mhm.
that place of peace. Yeah. But I was thinking about what you're saying about the brain being like a filter. Like when we leave the body, we leave the brain behind, but we're still conscious. And the brain kind of keeps us from realizing the fullness of our divinity, I guess you would want to say, and who
Right.
we really are and who we have been. Yeah.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, that was pretty much all I had to say at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, when we observe our thoughts going by like a fish in a river, that's a good visual. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
another thing about meditation or getting into there's one thing about your thoughts, but there's another thing about your emotions. You want to get beyond your emotions too.
yes,
What you don't want to be feeling anger or sadness or melancholiness and all that sort of stuff. If you want to go to that uh, place of peace and place of your divinity.
yeah. Did you hear the exercise that we did with the candle flame, the internal candle flame? The point of that exercise is to become aware of something that's alive, something has presence to it. And a candle flame is like that. There's another example I just love. The first time I ever saw the Grand Canyon, drove to the South Rim and walked in from the parking lot. You go up, there's that stone parapet wall, and you walk up and look over, and there's the biggest hole you have ever seen. And it is so big that it overwhelms the senses, and it literally takes your breath away. Your mind stops, your breathing stops, your body goes through these interesting sensations because you've never seen anything that big in your life. That's the kind of experience we want to look for within. We want to reproduce that within, because that inner space in us is way bigger than the Grand Canyon. It's like it goes in for miles and miles and miles. And if we can become aware of that, that shuts down the thinking. We don't have to observe thoughts coming in and going out. That's like so far away from us, it's not even an issue. And feelings the same way, because the only feeling we're experiencing is one of absolute awe. We're just breathtaking. This stops everything. We're stopped in our tracks. That's the kind of experience that's immediately available to us if all we have to do is back up into it and start feeling our way into that inner space. And that's presence. You see, that's why we focus on the light, in illumination, because the light is a living presence. Light radiates. Light is a presence. You can't have light without the sense of it being its own thing, its own living presence. It's an aliveness. And that's what we are. See, so when we go within and we're looking for that aliveness, what we're doing is we're really tapping into our own aliveness, which is, it manifests in our body. Like we have a central core, we have a central nervous system and spinal cord, and there's all that activity in there. But this is even deeper and more transcendent than that, because all of our internal, our nervous system is like an antenna. It's being excited from this deeper aliveness that we are, the aliveness that will always be there even when this body dies. You see, when this body drops away, that's where we find ourselves, is in that aliveness that we already are. And that's called the spirit. And it has a body of its own, and that we call the soul. So we've got these layers to ourselves. So what we're doing in meditation is we're becoming more and more aware of who and what we really are. You see, and there is no better way to get close to God, because that's like the threshold. Once we have to become aware of our own aliveness before we can approach God, because God is also an aliveness that we are nested within. So the only alternative, if we're not aware of that aliveness, is the chatter that's going on in our heads, right? The thoughts, the identifications, the feelings, the reactions, the desires, all of that stuff, that's just all mental chatter. And like the desires and the feelings, that goes a little deeper, it's not just cerebral activity. It goes into the deeper systems, but it's still basically the same thing. It's not us. What we are is the aliveness that precedes all of that. You see? So as we become more and more aware of that, then we have even the possibility of coming into contact with God itself, and not just an idea of God. You see, so this is how it's the experience that we're going for. We don't want to understand God, because we can't, it's too big. But we can sure as hell experience God. And that's what meditation, if we do it right, if we approach it in this way, that's what it avails to us. That reality is revealed, and it becomes a lifelong pursuit. And even when you find yourself in some kind of out-of-body experience, even if that's physical death, that's the ultimate out-of-body experience. That's where you find yourself. You find yourself as that core of aliveness, that is who and what you are. And then you're in a whole different space. That's the space you want to get into. You want to learn that. You want to be the explorer and go within. And that's what it means to go within. It's like in the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis, he said Narnia. He says, you want to know where it is? It's farther in and higher up. That's where we want to go. We go within, we want to go farther in and higher up. Okay, well, that's about all I have.
That was awesome. Thank you.
You bet. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you. I had a lot of really awesome aha moments. So definitely going to be integrating those over these next few weeks. So thank you.
All right. Well, please come back. You're more than welcome.
Thank you. I will.
All right. So as a specific assignment, do that internal candle exercise. And it helps, of course, if you have a real candle and get in a dark room and so you know what it looks like, and then blow it out and then look at it within. And then when we get back together, then we can talk about it.
Thank you, Michael. Excellent
You bet.
class.
Yeah, thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Nice to see you all. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.